Hi, everybody. This is Jack Miller, the president at T360. Welcome you to a Friday Fireside Chat yet again. I have today Dean Cottrill here, who is our SVP of Brokerage Consulting. Dean, welcome. We're really glad to have you here. Kelly White, who has been co-piloting with us the last month, is traveling today, so we brought Dean in. And then I am delighted to welcome Sean Black, founder, CEO of Knock. On our call today for a little fireside chat about the industry, about how things are, what your perspective is, and we're delighted to have you, Sean. So welcome.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it. Happy Friday.
Awesome. Well, I am coming from Southern California today. I'm at our San Juan Capistrano headquarters, T360 headquarters. I believe, Dean, you're back in Baltimore
I am
right now.
Yep, I'm on the East Coast in Baltimore, Maryland, just north.
Yeah, Sean, where are you at today?
I am in a little town outside, about 60 miles outside of Manhattan, called New Hope, which is where my refuge from COVID has been for the last, 9 months. But I'm normally based in New York City.
Got it. Well, how is your team? How's your family? How are the people connected to you? Have you been through this period?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Team's great, actually. So Knock is about 100 people, and we have from day one, almost 5 years now, been a distributed team. So we have people in 17 different states. We have WeWork memberships and Industrious memberships. And so we've always worked remote and distributed and had systems in place. So we're thriving in this market. And as you know, the housing market is thriving, and we can't keep pace with the demand like everyone else. So everyone's in good spirits and healthy, and yeah, what else can we ask for? My kids started school Wednesday, which was a little weird. First day of school with masks and all of the other accoutrements necessary was interesting.
Yeah, this year is a year like no other. I mean, my kids are back in school. They're all virtual right now, and they'll probably go back to in-person school in another month or so. But what a different time to be a parent for all of us.
So many bizarre things happening. I laughed yesterday at one of my colleagues that, like, I remember watching movies in the 90s that were like, the end of the world was 2020, right? And I'm like, well, it's kind of sort of like coming true. Hopefully not completely, but like, we're not in space, we're not driving spaceships, but it's almost like, if you saw San Francisco yesterday, it looked like it was Mars. So, crazy stuff.
It's very different. Well, Dean and I were just talking before you came on a little bit about, you have a really fascinating background for a person that's engaged in the industry, and it's different. And I think that the people that are watching now with us live, and then everybody that watches on replay, would benefit from hearing a little bit about kind of where you've come from and your perspective, because you have a pedigree that's a little unusual, I'd say.
Where do I start? When I was 15? No. Well, I do unusual. I probably, the thing, this game we used to play on, like, what's the one thing no one knows about you that's supposed to surprise people at a party? And the one thing I put out there is, well, I worked for the Vatican for 1.5 years. That was probably the most unusual stint that I did. And it was during college, undergrad. I sort of earned credit for it, which was interesting. But more interestingly is what happened when I was managing money for the Franciscans, specifically at the Vatican, and my boss, who had sort of like the purse strings for all the Franciscans globally, liked tech stocks, and he invested in tech stocks, and he taught me how to invest in tech stocks. And I changed from being an old school business guy to being this is the mid 90s, by the way. We were investing in Sun and Dell and Microsoft and the big blue chip boring companies now. But then they were sort of ripping. And so, I learned all about technology and did what people do when they want to shift gears at that point in their life. I went to grad school and got my MBA and started my first online business. And in 2000, it was an online auto insurance business. Auto and real estate have a lot of parallels in common. And I flushed the toilet on that with the bathwater, so to speak, in 2002. And I went to New York. I was in Boston at the time, went to grad school in Boston. And I met Barbara Corcoran at a party. At a Harvard Business School party, actually. And she said, you should come work for me. And so I did, when she was still running the Corcoran Group in New York. And this is 6 months after 9/11, by the way, right? Like, everybody thought New York was done, and it was just the opposite, actually. It was just beginning. So I cut my teeth on real estate in New York, and within a couple of years, real estate, most people forget this, but New York does not have an MLS. It has what they call REBNY, which is the Real Estate Board of New York, but it's all cooperative. There is no MLS. And so at the time, I got this like extreme example of what it was like to have information asymmetry in New York City. And I said, this is nuts. Like, this should all be online. And I started thinking about that and created a company called Big Digs. And one of my investors and first board members said, hey, I have a couple of Stanford Business School friends that are investing in a company just like yours on the other side of the country. And at the time it was called RealWide. And it was a couple of European guys named Pete and Sami, and we put the two together and called it Trillia. Thank God we didn't call it Big Digs or RealWide. It wouldn't have gone anywhere, I don't think. But yeah, that was 2005 when I got into the online real estate world, and have been in ever since.
Yeah, that is a very different. I mean, Dean, have you ever heard a story like that from anybody? I mean.
I love the cocktail party, and that's just great. That just brings in that personal side, and now we see Shark Tank, see Barbara out there on Shark Tank, and you guys, and you now Sean with Knock on doing some exciting things. So yeah, great story, great line.
Well, and to start in New York. New York's such a different market from most of the rest of the country in terms of just not just it being New York City, but its business practices, and like you said, that not having an MLS and. It's a very unusual market in that regard.
Co-op boards too. I had a site called Wallfly for a while, which was it told you kind of what co-op boards were how they really make decisions. If anybody doesn't know New York and co-op boards, they don't know what the hell I'm talking about. But like to get into an apartment in New York, you have to go through a board. It's a 3-month process. You have to be interviewed and dissected. They look at all your financial statements. It doesn't matter how rich you are, you have to show everything. And they always said, like, what if you were on the fly on the wall of these conversations? It's like, are they rich enough? Are they this enough? Are they that enough? But it was insane market for sure.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Dean.
That's not to throw, Sean. I'm just curious, because I'm fascinated with your background and really entrepreneurs like you that have done so well in different business areas. Do you have, when you look at, say you focused in on real estate, cocktail party, Corcoran, you start focusing, what's the process that you go through? Or how do you think, do you see like a landscape, you see gaps, you look to fill those gaps? I mean, what's your mental process that you go through in putting together organizations like what you've been doing?
I think in the case of real estate, there were a couple of things happening. So when I buried my first company, the first internet company, Every Mile, I spent all my money bootstrapping it, and so I needed to make money, and real estate in New York seemed to be a good way to do it while learning from somebody like Barbara Corcoran how real estate worked, and then just connecting. And I sort of from the beginning thought, it was the depths. If you think about like at that time, like the bubble had burst. Literally, there was no tech happening anywhere. Boston had disappeared in terms of being a tech hub. And I remember thinking like, wow, this should all go online, but there was no money. Like there was no, Silicon Valley was, mostly like homeless people at the time, San Francisco especially, because it hadn't moved up yet to the city. And I remember just thinking like, it wasn't time. It was time in terms of what the customers needed, but it wasn't time in terms of like the resources weren't there. And to me, what I thought about, and it seems ironic back then, I thought, well, the 1.0 bubble, like all the low hanging fruit had been picked, all the easy stuff like e-commerce had been done. And if you're going to find something like get back online and do something big, it had to be in a space that was hard. I don't know. I'm going to put a cross on my back. And real estate's hard, as we all know. Real estate is really hard. And it's funny, like Pete, my co-founder at Trillia, had come from, he was like the first hire at lastminute.com, which was the big travel portal of Europe that ultimately sold to Travelocity, which then sold to Expedia. And he was like, we were all naive. We were all in our like early 30s thinking like, we're going to change the world. We're going to change real estate. We're going to put it all online overnight. And then like within a year or two, Pete came to say, sometimes revolutions come in evolutions. And this is one of those times. Real estate is definitely like financial services and healthcare, an evolutionary revolution for sure. Mm-hmm. But when you look around, it was just so much opportunity. It was such a big transaction. There were so many parts of it. The bigger question is like, how do you attack it? Because it's so big that it can swallow you up. One of my investors, RE, Raju, who sits on my board, likes to say, and I like to repeat, startups don't usually die of starvation. They die of indigestion, meaning taking on too much. And I think real estate is one of those areas where you can think you can change everything, but it's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, I've been in the brokerage industry since about 2001, and watching technology companies that have come into the industry. And you're right, they'll, oh, we're going to change everything. And it's like, no, why don't you focus on just changing one little thing?
Yeah.
If you do a good job there, you'll probably be around in another couple of years.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very difficult. And so that's kind of validating to hear you say, like, as an entrepreneur, you recognize that and come across that. So, well, that's a great segue to kind of a conversation we're having this month. Our this month is we're talking to companies that have introduced some new business model or some new thinking or a new way of doing business into the industry. And, Knock has been doing that. You founded Knock in 2015 from everything that I've seen. And so you guys have been at it for a little while. And part of what we wanted to hear from you is, what is the new take that you have? What are you doing differently? How are you approaching it now? Having come through the seasoning process of building an enterprise in real estate before, but we're curious to hear about it. Our listeners are too.
Yeah. So my co-founder, one of my two co-founders, Jamie and I, we're both on the founding team at Trillia. Jamie was head of product and I ran sales and operations. And obviously we did everything in between as the first few people. And if you think about it at a high level, what happened in 2005 between us and mostly us and Zillow was an information revolution, right? We democratized all the information that buyers needed to make the single biggest purchase of their lives. And that information was really trapped behind walled gardens before, right? Like I remember back then outside of New York where there were MLSs, you had to get an agent to give you a login to the MLS. And Realtor.com existed, but there was only listings on there. And there were no, if you guys know this, like NAR forbid them from having comps until like relatively recently, which let us come in and, basically open up contextual landscape, if you will, on search. And so like what you saw, we launched in 2005 at Trillia, and then Zillow launched a year later with just this estimate, no search at all. And between the two of us, we were creating heat maps, and like, then a couple of years in, 2008 happened, and people more than ever needed insight into what the hell was happening. And so there was this massive, information revolution. And, we naively thought, like, one of the interesting things that I think we've proved now at Knock is back in 2005, there were 50 million people searching online every month between Realtor.com and the big broker sites and newspaper sites, AOL Real Estate, remember that, and Yahoo Real Estate, which Jamie ran actually before Trillia. Yep. And we thought, it was only 5 million homes bought and sold. And we were like, clearly more people want to move than do, for all the uncertainty and inconvenience and cost, right? You buy a house, you have to wait 5 years to earn enough to basically pay enough equity to pay break even on it, right? Mm-hmm. And we thought, clearly, if you made this, more certain, more convenient, and more cost effective, more people would do it. And we thought, like, we'll for sure help get that 6% commission down to something like half. And if then the precedent was, like everywhere else in the world, is a lot less, right? Like Pete, my co-founder, was from the UK, and commissions there are 2%, right? There's only one broker on one side, so it's a lot more efficient. There's a lot less people with their hand in the pie. And we thought we'd at least get it down like by half. And that didn't happen, right? 2015, we went public. Zillow had gone public a year before us. We merged into one company. And so you had 200 million people totally empowered with all the information and they would ever want, all on one or two sites. But the commission, sellers hadn't benefited at all. The sell side was still just as offline as ever, just as opaque as ever, just as expensive. And, it was in 2005, $60 billion a year in commissions, and now it's 85 billion. That 6% is held pretty strong. And there's no more opacity. So in 2015, when Jamie and I got back together, we were both selling companies and said, well, now the Trillia and Zillow are there and all the buyers have all the information. Now it's time to do that sort of for sellers. And that was the premise. We had no product in mind. What we did, while we wanted to attack a piece that we could actually, make a difference on, we also wanted eventually a mass market solution. So, what we focused on were the people who were buying and selling at the same time, the 2/3 of people who are both, trying to buy a house and sell one. They probably are illiquid, all their liquidity is in the equity in the home. They're probably a family. They probably, a lot of them have two jobs. So it's really hard to sort of project manage buying and selling and all the uncertainty and, making a contingent offer or getting the kids ready to go into another school, and it all falls apart. Because sort of like as an entrepreneur, the 101 is you can't solve a problem for somebody if they don't know they have it, right? And one of the challenges of a second time home buyer, first time home seller is they don't know how hard it is to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
But it's scary when you got kids and a job and you're like trying to get the kids into the next school district. And if it doesn't happen in time, then they'll basically be left back at the old school. And your friends are telling you how horrible their experience was. We thought if we could focus on that contingent of the market and solve the chicken and egg problem, that would be the way to go. And we didn't know how to do it. We had all kinds of interesting ideas. Fizbo site was one of the original ones. I think Compass shares that origin too. And we ended up with this idea eventually of the trade-in, where we could get you in a new home first and then deal with your old house. And that evolved. The way we sort of accomplished that evolved quite a bit, from what we used to call list guarantee to a home trade-in to now the knock home swap.
And Sean, take us, if you can, because everyone watching probably is not 100% certain exactly how you do that. So in that home swap, for example, can you kind of just take them through that, process, step one, step two, how you guys work through that process?
Yeah, and so at the beginning of the year, we quietly launched a home swap to a handful of brokerages in each of our markets. We were before then direct to consumer. We were, advertising on TV and online. We did everything soup to nuts. We were the broker. We were the title company. We weren't the lender, but we had partner lenders. And in the beginning of the year, what we did differently was we turned our platform inside out. We're a technology company. We're a marketplace at the end of the day. And we were at a closed marketplace, and now we're an open one. So now any agent can come, that we partner with, that gets certified as a NOC certified agent, which is a pretty straightforward process, can bring a customer to us and say, this person is buying and selling. They can't stand the uncertainty and the inconvenience. We get them fully pre-approved for a mortgage like any lender would. But we also, in addition to underwriting them for a mortgage, we underwrite the home that they're coming from. And using data science, we figure out how much it's worth, how much equity they have, not because we want to buy it, but because we want to figure out how much equity they have to play with. And then we release that equity by basically giving them the mortgage for the new home immediately, not making them wait until the old home sold. In fact, they haven't even listed it yet. And then we give them a home swap loan. So we give them the down payment for the new home. We give them money to repair the old home. We actually manage the network of contractors that gets the house ready in time, quickly. And then we pay the old mortgage off while it's on the market. And meanwhile, they're already in the new home. They're in the new school district. They're living their new life. And this was all pre-COVID, right? Like we were optimizing for, most importantly, convenience. We thought initially when we started, we thought certainty would be the biggest benefit, the biggest value prop we could give consumers, meaning like you knew your home, that offer you were going to make wasn't going to fall through in 3 months when the house didn't appraise or your mortgage fell through or whatever. And it turns out convenience was way more important. The idea that you didn't have to live in the old home while it was being repaired, managing the contractors, you didn't have to live there while it was being shown, while, leave on 6 times on a Sunday to go sit at Starbucks and, while some realtor, ran through your home with a buyer who may or may not be interested. Now you have nowhere to go, by the way. There's no Starbucks to sit in anymore. And so now, the goal is get you into your new house, do it with a non-contingent offer. So we pre-approve you up front. We know how much your house is worth. We lend you all the money. Brad Inman termed it a couple of weeks ago, rightly. We pre-fund that customer. So they can go into the market and say, I'm going to make a non-contingent offer on this house. They move in right away. Then we deal with the crap that they leave behind, which is the home that needs to get fixed up, put on the market, and shown.
Yeah, the other piece of that too, Sean, is that they only pay for one mortgage. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So they're getting a regular conventional mortgage from us. It's competitive in terms of rates. They actually end up, on average, historically, we've gotten a 3 to 5% discount on the buy side because we're a non-contingent offer for them. They're not contingent on a mortgage, they're not contingent on their home selling because all that's taken care of. And then we pay the old mortgage. So they're moving into that home. They take that home. It's in their name. They're earning equity on that new home immediately. They got it for something a little bit less than the market price. And then we take care of that old mortgage out of the equity from their old home that'll eventually come to them when they sell it. We're paying whatever they want us to pay the contractors to paint and carpet the place and make it look its best, and give them the down payment on the new home that they otherwise would have to wait for the old home to sell to get.
And so the follow-up to that, I'm sure a lot in the industry is saying, okay, where do you guys make your money? So in that process, where do you make that money? Because it's got to be so streamlined that you're able to take. Yeah. So I'm curious in your input on that and feedback on that.
So historically, before we launched the home swap, we were the broker. We had salaried agents we called local license experts, and we made money on the commission. But when we went to partner with with agents and brokers in all our markets, we knew we couldn't have it. We couldn't have both. It was one or the other. So we got licensed as a lender. So we make 100% of our revenue comes from, we originate the loan. We're a mortgage originator. We're not an underwriter. We ultimately have large, mostly publicly traded underwriters behind us that are behind these mortgages, and they pay us to originate a mortgage for a customer, just like any other lender would. And so for the customer, it's the same cost. There's no additional fees. For the agent that partners with us, they keep 100% of the commission on both sides. We don't charge a revenue share. We don't charge, because it's their customer, not ours. We don't charge a tech fee or any kind of fee whatsoever. They keep their commission. We keep our lending revenue, and everybody coexists, really happily.
Wow. And you guys also moved into title as well, correct?
Correct. We did title as a necessary, it's obviously helpful, but it was when we did the home trade-in that we had to make sure, like, we could do it all right, but if things fell apart at closing, we got blamed. So we were like, well, if we're gonna get blamed, we got to own that closing process and that date and make sure, it doesn't get moved, because everything had to kind of line up, to your point, and be really elegant. So yes, we do title, and we do lending as well.
Okay. And is the change you made? It sounds like you made the assessment that it was just an easier, more lucrative, or maybe both path than continuing down the being a broker path of just saying, hey, we're going to move fully into the lending side.
So look, like, we're a technology company. We're not a broker. We're not a lender. Like, it just happens to be how we, pay the bills. And that's how we think about the world. We're building a product, and, we needed to be the agent for the first couple of years, because we need to figure out, like, what can be automated, what can be simplified. We knew from Trulia days, day one at Trulia, we knocked on doors and said, give us your listings. We'll sign a waiver that says we'll never, pay you or charge you for your own leads, and the traffic will always be free. You do what you do, we'll do what we do. We needed to basically have our hands in the transaction, understand how to automate it. But once we did it for a couple of years, we knew what agents needed to basically do what we were doing, and they begged us to get in the door, because we used to have a network of agents that used to, like, take our customers on tours. They used to install yard signs for us and lock boxes, and they were at every brokerage and you could imagine. And they would ask us, like, hey, can we give our customers their own trade-in? We're like, well, we'd have to split the commission, and you're already splitting it with the broker, and then maybe you got the lead from Zillow, and they're like, it's just going too many different directions, right? Mm-hmm. And it's just got to be really clean. So yeah, we the big shift we made was like, look, we were getting our network and all of our markets, all our agents were saying, can you please let us, and we were like, well, if you come hang your shingle here, you could do it. But that's hard. Like, people have been at a brokerage for 10 years or 15 years. They don't want to leave. So we just decided, you know what, like, they have the customer, we have the platform, we have the liquidity, we can get married and basically, grow a lot faster. And, we went into this year pre-COVID with 5 markets. And since we launched officially in May, the home swap, we're already in 8. We'll be in 13 by the end of the year, which just proves that, like, doing this as in a partnership is much easier than the sort of step function that you have to build one market at a time, build your brand in that market, hit a customer 7 times before they know who you are. That's expensive.
Right. You're bringing a solution to basically a distribution channel where the agents and the brokers, they've already established their brand. They have customers. You're providing a solution for them that they can bring to their existing clients.
Yeah, if you go back to this thesis we had at Trulia that, like, back then 50 million people were searching online. Now it's like 250 million people each month, and only 6 million homes bought and sold. Like, there's all this pent up demand that if it were easier and cheaper and more certain would come off the sidelines. And if you look at our Zillow reviews, I think we have 700 plus Zillow reviews, 5-star, but more importantly, what they all say in common is, 1, they thought it was too good to be true, and we proved them wrong. And 2, they were like, we wouldn't have been able to do this for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, because we couldn't. The idea of, like, hiring the contractors and, like, trying to, line the whole transaction up, and the kids are in school and we're working 2 jobs and my husband travels, like, they couldn't manage it. So we're getting people off the sideline. So these agents who would otherwise have a customer who's like, I really want to move, but like, oh my God, I'm procrastinating because it's just such a big deal and it's so uncertain and I can't stomach it. Now these agents come and say like, hey, you don't have to take an iBuyer offer, an investor offer, and leave money on the table. I can sort of like, make this whole thing seamless for you, and you can get into the new home, and I'll deal with everything else with Knock.
And you guys started in Atlanta, my understanding, is that correct, Sean? And then you guys have expanded, and you've got that aggressive, you said 13 markets by the end. And so I think very high density markets is what you're looking at, and then certain price points. Is that kind of how you look at markets to expand?
Yeah, so we had one of the things that we learned at Trillia. So in 2008, in the mortgage crisis, Pete, my CEO, we had so much data. We had about 4 or 5 million unique visitors at the time, which was enough to give insights to the media on like what's happening at the depths of like the 08 crisis. And we all knew there was a bottom, and eventually things would turn. And the question was like when and where and like how fast. And so we had a full-time economist, and we were using heat maps, and we were basically every week going on CNN and CNBC and basically saying like where people are focused on their search behavior as opposed to like what happened 3 months ago in the tax records. And what we realized is there were like 40 plus criteria that insulated certain markets for the worst of 2008, right? And Dallas was like the poster child. And it was like diversity of industry, so that, if you were Vegas in 08 and you only had one source of income, the tourism industry, you were out of work because like businesses stopped traveling and people stopped traveling. And that was it. But if you looked at things like Atlanta, where we started, and Atlanta got hit in 08, but like 6 years later, it had diversified. It had entertainment and music, and it had big, it has like what the third largest studio system. People don't realize that outside of New York and Hollywood. A lot of movies get made there. And so we had this like algorithm that we created that ranked markets in terms of like the predictability and the ability to be insulated from an economic downturn, because it's inevitable, right? Like this is real estate. It's just a cyclical business. It is what it is. And so what we found was like these secondary cities, which have, a fairly homogeneous home stock relative to say New York or San Francisco or Seattle, and the average home price is closer to the median. There's a ton of data that you can get a lot of confidence that a house is going to sell within a couple percentage points, of what you predict, within a couple of weeks of what you predict. And so that's where we started. Atlanta was a really good example where the data was plentiful. And we also had we believed in this 30-year trend of people moving out of big cities into secondary markets. People, especially the millennial generation, they want to be in a city. They just can't afford to be in New York or San Francisco. They want culture. They want food. They don't want to be in the exurbs or the suburbs like their parents did. But they can't afford New York. And so COVID just accelerated that exodus. And so like all our markets are like 60 plus secondary markets where people were already moving, and now are doing so in droves. And, like it just doesn't work, I think, in New York or San Francisco, because the real estate there is like more like art, right? Like, and it's driven by like in San Francisco, for example, in Seattle, it's driven by like IPOs. And in New York, it's driven by, Wall Street bonuses at the beginning of the year. And that's not predictable at all, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious too, and I don't monopolize, Jack, but I had another question to follow up that.
Oh, shoot, Dean. I've got 3 more right behind you.
Yeah, so I'm loving this conversation, Sean, and what you guys are doing. So changing and moving in I think March or April or May, whenever it was this year, and really opening up and working with agents and brokers as you expand into markets. Do you see it? Are you going into markets and looking to partner with agents within brokerages, or would prefer to deal with brokerages and then work with the agents within brokerages?
So both. We tend to go into the brokerage and partner with them because they have access to the agent base. They obviously have credibility. Fortunately, both Jamie and I, as I mentioned, Jamie before Trillia ran Yahoo Real Estate, so we have a lot of relationships with brokers. They know us and trust us. And so, we just go into them and say, like, this is what we're doing. Why don't we give access to your agents? You can facilitate it. You can, get them together and put your stamp of approval on it. And early on, we actually really leaned on them for input. Like, we did it this way. We have an idea of how we think the agents are going to want to do it, but we need some validation as we were building into the platform, the ability for them to have access. And so it worked. And so when we go into a market, we tend to reach out to a broker, and they help us basically organize their agents. But an agent can come, if you go to knock.com at the top, there's an agent tab, an agent can come and sign up on their own. It just tends to be easier to work with brokers to get to the agents.
Yeah, you get a little bit more support and some backing when you have a broker that is behind it versus a solo. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, well, I'm curious, Sean. Aside from the 2020, like we said earlier, such a weird year. There's we've got a pandemic, we've got protests, we got a presidential election, we got all kinds of things going on that I think really distort maybe the experience in the real estate market and industry right now. But looking beyond that, what do you see? What are some of you've picked a particular set of challenges you're solving. What do you see that are the big challenges that real estate has for the coming years? What are the things that you think still remain as problems to be solved or challenges to be overcome?
Yeah, so I think, when I mentioned like in the 05 era, even up until 15 was a information revolution, right? And Trillion Zillow kind of won that war. And that really was like a 1 or 2 horse race. What you see now and what we in 15 and Open Door kicked off, I think, was a transaction revolution, right? There was really nothing. It was like when we started in 15, when we started Trillion in 2005, nothing was happening. I mean, literally, in San Francisco, our neighbors at our first Trillion office were literally like homeless people. Our cars got broken into all the time. Like there was no Silicon Valley anymore. And I feel like, and then people would ask us, because we had a huge boom, obviously, technologically, and we would have investors, VC, say, "What do you do in real estate?" Like that was really to them like boring. And we're like, "What are you kidding? Like this is the biggest transaction ever." And they're like, "Yeah, but people only do it every 5 to 7 years." And we're like, "Yeah, but then they obsess about it in between those 5 and 7 years, and they're dreaming and they're online all the time." Anyway, we proved it wrong. But now, like it's interesting that Zillow and Trillion won the war on, their designation site. They have network effects. No one's ever going to knock them off that pedestal, but they're a buyer platform. And so what about sellers? And I think what you're seeing now is a transaction revolution. And I think what you're starting to see, and it's going to take time, but you're going to see that real estate should really work like a marketplace, like the stock market. It should be liquid. People should be able to get in and out of homes much faster for a lot less money. You shouldn't have to wait 5 years to earn enough equity to pay the commission that you paid coming in the door and the closing costs, right? And I think COVID actually, it's funny, in 08, we were kind of like, when we started Trillion in 05, nobody needed us. Like, homes would go, if you remember back then, we're all going to date myself now, in New York, we would put an ad in the newspaper for $400 a line, and it would sell in a week, right? And it was a correlation of like, the agent was like, New York Times really works. I put an ad in and the house sold. Well, no, it was just like, it was the market, right?
Market,
and then 08 happened, and realtors were like, holy crap, I can't afford $400 a line for 3 lines a week for 6 months if a house is going to sit on the market. And so like our business just kind of took off because consumers desperately needed information and realtors desperately needed marketing that didn't cost them $400 a line. And now, for better or worse, COVID is forcing innovation in the real estate transaction, and it's going to accelerate. We had announced a couple of weeks ago that we're partnered with a big title company and in a title business, Endpoint, and they're digitizing title, right? Which has been tried before. They tried it on the blockchain, it never worked. But now, like, no one wants to go to a closing, right? Like, no one wants to show up physically at a closing, and no closing agent wants to show up at somebody's house, and do a closing either. So it's forcing the industry to become innovative and digitize everything. We up until COVID, we're doing 600 inspections a month on the houses that we're using to lend money against the sell side of the house, which we got a ton of data from. And we tried in the past to get customers to take photos of their house, and it was no good. Now suddenly, like, they're taking amazing photos on their phone, and like we can have, they're happy to not have someone come into the home and just do it themselves. So I think what you're seeing is real estate is finally going to become a liquid marketplace, and we have to get through the muck of digitizing all the nooks and crannies. And I think what you're going to basically see is probably in the next 5 years, a consolidation of a lot of the people who are taking little pieces of the transaction and putting it together under one place so that it all becomes increasingly streamlined. And from the consumer's perspective, I always said, and it sounds impossible, you used to say in the home trade-in, we want to make it as easy to trade in your house as to trade in your car. And then you can unpack it from there. But now I think it's almost like it should be as easy to get in and out of a house as it is to get in and out of an Airbnb, right? Like, we had a customer that was actually in the Houston Chronicle for us last week who said, I bought a house, I downsized, and I realized I downsized too far. The house is too small. And so like 9 months later, I want to get out. Would I either take a big loss? Well, no, they came to us and we were able to, help them make a non-contingent offer, and, they actually made a little money. That should be possible for anybody anywhere, right? You should be like, if you make a mistake and you buy the wrong house in the wrong neighborhood, or suddenly you get a job across the country, you should be able to take it.
Yeah, you get a neighbor that you can't stand, right? The fence isn't big enough or wide enough. What do you foresee though, Sean? If you talk about like 6 million, I know you say about 2/3, 6 million homes sold now. That's kind of really your focus. In that 5-year timeline, are you guys forecasting it to go to 9 million homes sold just because of the efficiency that you're talking about?
Yeah, no, I think it has to, I don't know if we have a forecast on the number, but we had always hypothesized when it was 5 that it could easily be 10 if you could cut everything in half, right? Cost being one of them. And the question is, on the cost side, one of the things that we empower our agents to do, and it's really up to them to determine what fee they charge to their customers. But if they're now handling both sides of the transaction for a customer, so they're getting paid on both sides, and we're digitizing and making easier all the stuff they would have otherwise had to do by hand, it's a lot easier for them to say, you know what, I'm not going to charge you 3 and 3, I'm going to charge you 4, right? And why it's never worked before, I think the world of Redfin, and Glenn's amazing, and like, they're the only ones that survived the discount brokerage model, and like nobody else could make it work. And I think it's because ultimately the discount came off the backs of the agents, right? And they hire really young agents and they train them, and any of them that are really good end up going out to Sotheby's to make money when they grow up, so to speak. Right. That doesn't work. Like, you can't sustain that. A customer wants to go back to that agent 5 years later and use them again, ideally at the same brokerage. So I think like as we as an industry and the tech enabled folks get in and like just take out all the laborious, monotonous, duplicative work, agents can actually play the role they should play, which is a consultant, an expert, a local expert. We call them local licensed experts because we think that's what they are. And they can not have to, put themselves on the side of buses and park benches, and they don't have to do contracts they've never been trained to do because it's all digital, and it keeps them from messing up when they're tired. And I think that'll increasingly put pressure and ability for the agents to do what they do best, which is be an expert and a consultant at a local level, while still making the same amount of money, if not more, and handle a lot more volume because a lot of it's automated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, a compelling vision, and one I think that you're not the only company or person working towards, because many of the other innovators they're talking about the same things, about the efficiency and about creating the industry's wanted the one-stop shop forever, but we just haven't had the tools or the finances or the backing, right, to make it happen. So that's compelling.
The question becomes like, can you be the Amazon of real estate? And, is there 1 or 2 companies that basically you go to by default? I have a hard time believing it. I think, again, it's, at Zillow, when they first started, Rich and Lloyd had literally put travel agent. They had started Expedia before, and they put travel agent out of business. And I think they thought coming in, they announced, I remember the first year at Inman, we're going to put the real estate agent out of business. They were really popular then, by the way. And a year later, they came back and apologized and said why houses aren't like plane seats and hotel rooms, right? So like, you need that local expertise. That's never going to go away. But there's so much opportunity to make this process easier and more liquid and more transparent and efficient, and bring a lot of the costs down, and while still the experts get paid for their expertise.
It's very strong, very strong. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, and we were asking all of our guests this month for if they have any piece of advice or coaching for our industry listeners or agents or brokers or team leaders that follow us. Is there anything that any coaching you have to offer, any advice, any perspective that you think would help them?
I don't know. I think of the best piece of advice that someone gave me was quoting Winston Churchill, because I think this is where we all are right now, who said, when going through hell, just keep going. Just keep going. That's the best piece of advice, because I think we all know we have what customers need, and increasingly we can make it easier and faster and better, and it's worth doing. And what I loved about Trulia, and what I love about even pointing people to our Zillow reviews, is like we have a real, we as an industry can have a really big impact on people's lives. We free them. I say, like, the irony of real estate of the home is, like, it's the American dream. Everybody wants it. And then when they get in it, they're suddenly a prisoner in their dream because they can't get out easily of that house and get, and now you have, like, in the millennial generation and beyond, you have people who, like, move around, do jobs every 2 years, and they don't want to be stuck, and they want to go explore other cities, right? So I just think, like, it's going to be hell and mucky. It always is. The sausage making on the back end is always is not pretty, but it's totally worth doing.
Fascinating stuff, John. Really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, Sean, really thank you again for coming on. I learned a lot today about your perspective and what you guys are doing. I think it's a needed part of improvement for our industry. So it's great to hear we have another entrepreneur who's really pushing hard at it. And again, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. I know we're going to get a lot of replays on this one because it's a great conversation. So
thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah. To everybody out there, we'll see you guys again next week. Thanks for joining us. Same time next Friday. Talk to you soon.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.